Hello everybody, this video is about the relation between human and the nature. So in the Western societies we have these separated ideas of the human or mankind and the nature. Nature coming from the romantic concept of this pure, untouched, pristine, wild, beautiful, good entity, and the human as the corrupting, transformative, dirty, polluting force which is infuriating and only destroying the beauty of nature. So it's kind of interesting, but it's not like this all around the world. For example, in most of Asia or in South America, in some tribes, they have different concept and perception of nature. For example, in the romantic art, Western art, we can see that they paint this nature, this pure nature, without humans, without human influence, without human interaction. But in Asian paintings, there is always this landscape of nature, and there is like a small element of human life, like for example people working in the rice fields, or maybe some little hut. So it's always in this harmony. Interestingly, there's a hypothesis that the Amazon rainforest was highly influenced and it's thriving because of the human interaction, and because the indigenous tribes, they properly contributed to the development and diversity of the ecosystems in this area. For example, there is this behavior which they engage in when they build their villages from the raw material coming only from the rainforest, and once in a while they burn their villages and move to completely different place where they build their new village. This eventually contributes to the incense, and the material from the burning actually contribute and give minerals to the soil, which make the forest grow faster and better. So very curious relationship they have with their nature. They live in a certain symbiosis where they actually consume the nature, but they are part of this nature, so they kind of return to the nature. Also, their burial rituals and all that is much more in tune with the environment and the ecosystem as the Western concept. I think for these people, even to consider something concept as vegetarianism or veganism, which is basically coming hand to hand with the agricultural industrial societies, is kind of rare. Like, I cannot imagine how they could even convey of this notion, because they basically don't live in this separation from the nature, which eventually brought us to the concept of veganism and vegetarianism. I think they consume, but they are as well consumed by the nature. So there is a high balance. They live certain limited amount of time. They are vulnerable much more than we are, because they don't separate themselves to these artificial bubbles like houses, cities, these kind of order bubbles which we are surrounded by in the West. So paradoxically, the concept of nature-human relation in the West is very different, very, very radically different. And from the Romanticism, there came a transcendentalist movement, which is kind of religious, spiritual, transcendental philosophical movement, which is kind of conveying the idea that the divine is in the nature, and the nature is the pure expression of the divine, and is actually separating the man from its from the nature. And the fathers of national parks in the United States, as John Muir, for example, was transcendentalist, or another very interesting transcendentalist are Waldo Emerson or David Henry Thoreau, and all these people like put their fundamental basis of the environmental conservationist efforts for the Western society. But it was not that beautiful. There was a lot of blood involved in these intentions, because as they considered human is inherently evil and bad and disrupting the natural order, there was like a bloody massacres and on the indigenous people who lived in these natural areas. And in order to make and create the national parks, they actually depopulated these national parks. They like kicked out many indigenous people from their lands, and to establish this kind of pure ideal nature, which we in the West believe in. And yeah, very, very different approaches, East and West, to the human-nature relationship. I really think that also all the veganism and vegetarianism is only relevant from the perspective of the Western society, which is so separated, so infrastructuralized in this system, in this complex system of cities, that for us veganism, vegetarianism is like the only inevitable possibility to really reduce our impact on the environment, because we live long, we engage in much more consumerist life, we don't recyclate, we just like consume much more than a person in the natural state can consume. Also, for example, the fact that we pollute, it's kind of new concept, right? Like the plastics and all these materials which are contaminating the environment are inherently linked with the industrialized societies. So I think the biggest issue is now the transition. Paradoxically, I think the West is more transitioning towards the conception, or there are some efforts towards the conception of the perception of nature-human relationship as a more holistic idea. So kind of being more in tune with nature, observe the biotechnological solutions which the nature provided us. And on the other hand, many societies which are now getting industrialized are going to this separation state, which Western was long time and still is in right now. And these societies, as China, for example, they go from the more holistic perspective and relation to more human nature separated relation. We can see that the contamination is really a thing. For example, me living in Indonesia, I could see that the people who, through the colonialization, passed through from the feudal, harmonious nature-human relationship, without this material and without these technologies, which are eventually creating the pollution and contaminating, for example, like plastic material. The colonization like accelerated this process, but still like it was not integrated that much in the educational system of these societies than in the practical level. So if you go to Indonesia, for example, you will see like forests full of plastic material. There is no infrastructure of garbage taking, and the people are not really even conscious about the impact, the long-lasting impact these materials will have. So definitely problem and clash between those two kinds of perceptions of how we relate to the environment, and definitely we are in a shifting mode. I'm not sure if too good or too bad. I personally try to see myself more as one with nature. I still cling very much into the beautiful, romanticized perspective of nature, that it's something beautiful, pure, but it's really naive version of nature, like from me, person from a city, because I don't really consider the savage, aggressive, destructive power of nature, which is also there. And when you live in the nature, you will eventually know this part of nature. So the nature is not only this all beauty, all nice entity, but it's also this destructive, evil force. It's actually it's not a moral agent, so it's not good or bad. It just is, and it has whole parts of it, as all the existence have these parts of what we define in the moral categories as good or bad. So yeah, I'm trying to be more in the integrative perception of my relation with nature, but I see the tendencies where many societies, which are, for example, like China, which are getting industrialized, are passing through and from this united concept of them harmonious with nature to more separate perspective, which is inherent to the urbanistic life, which is popping out in many countries. Yeah, I hope you really liked it, and I hope the human relation with the nature will be always better, and we will not eventually destroy it, but learn from it and prosper and thrive together with the nature, as it was the case during many centuries.